So my guest this morning is Nogah from the Centre of Women's Justice. I'm very privileged to have you there this morning, Nogah, because I know how busy you are. So thank you very much for joining me. Do you just want to start by introducing yourself?
So my name is Nogah Ofer. I'm a solicitor at the Centre for Women's Justice, which is a legal charity. So we were set up in 2016. I've been there for 6 years, and our mission is to hold the state to account around failings on violence against women and girls. So we mostly deal with failings in the criminal justice system, like police and Crown Prosecution Service failings.
And how busy are you?
We're very busy. We've got, we can't meet all the demands of all the people that come to us, unfortunately, because we are really a very small charity.
How many have you got working there?
So there's probably about 12 of us all together. We've got sort of two separate teams, and then we've also got some people who don't do legal work who help us with, press and accounts and things like that. So we've got two different types of legal teams. One is our litigation team, and they do strategic litigation. So that's when you bring a case that's obviously going to help the individual person, but also is going to try to bring about wider change. So trying to bring about like a change in the law or change in police policies and that sort of thing. So we've got, I think, 3 solicitors and 2 trainees in that team. And they take on cases in the same way as any solicitor would, in a solicitor's firm. They take on the clients, they represent them in court, they do everything that a solicitor would normally do. And then we've got a second team, which is my team. We call that the legal inquiries team, and we've got 2 lawyers in that team and myself as supervisor, and I do some cases as well. And what we do is we don't take on the cases. We just give advice, and most of the cases, probably about over 80% of them, is what we call second tier advice. So that means that we give advice to frontline support workers like ISVAs, IDVAs, other types of frontline support workers, stalking support workers, any kind of frontline services. They come to us, we give the advice, and then they pass it on to the survivor. Or sometimes it is very complicated, then we meet, online with the survivor ourselves, but generally it still goes via the support worker. And that way, obviously, we can help a lot more people because the support workers do a lot of the work for us. They prepare chronologies, they kind of do the go-between work. And we don't take on the case, we don't represent the women, we give them advice, and quite often we will draft letters for them and then they pass that on. So for example, if they're doing a victim's right to review, we might draft that letter and then they will submit it themselves in their own name. So that way we can do a lot more cases. So we do probably about 300-400 inquiries a year. So it's kind of high volume. Obviously they range from, one of them might be, the quickest one might be, one query, we send a bit of advice, that might be 20 minutes. Another one might go on for months. For example, sometimes we have disputes about third-party material requests. We go back and forth. They might go on for 3, 4, 5 months. We stay with the issue until that particular issue is sorted out, and then we close the case. If somebody has a new issue, they can come back to us, we reopen it. But we don't carry on with the same woman all the way through. We don't, we close the case and we finish that issue. If she's got another problem, she can come back to us. But we don't represent the women all the way through the criminal justice process in the way that, say, a solicitor who's representing a defendant, they would open the file and they would represent them with the police all the way through. But because we're a small charity, we try to make the best use of our resources.
Yeah. How are you finding it with funding at the moment? Because it's absolutely, we're struggling like mad. There's literally no funding is there at the moment for services, particularly women's services, I find. And I think there's a lot of charities that are closing the doors, sadly. because of that lack of funding. And as we know, the work that you do and that organisations and charities like Resolute do as well, you know, it's vital. It's vital work that we are doing to help these women. And I think, you know, it saddens me that the government hasn't sort of made that a priority, because we're literally on our knees when it comes to funding.
Yeah, I mean, I know it is really, really tough in the women's sector, and then everything's like dribs and drabs, and you're just waiting till the next cliff edge and so on. I think our funding is a bit different to most frontline services funding. So we don't take any money, like any state funding. We don't take any money from local authorities. We don't take money from PCCs.
No, we don't.
So I think...
Yeah, we don't. So that makes it a little bit harder, because I find that if we was to do that, we'd lose our voice.
Yes, exactly. And we are suing the state, you know, our litigation team and our advice team. We're bringing legal cases against the state, so we've got to be totally independent. Whereas a lot of frontline services, like a lot of ISVA services, are funded by the Police and Crime Commissioner. A lot of domestic abuse services are funded by their local authorities. That means that, I mean, obviously that's they kind of have to be constantly like tendering, getting commissioned, and they often, like, their contracts will have like gagging clauses. They're not allowed to criticise their local authority and so on. So, you know, there's lots of different kind of models, but I think we go to slightly different funders, and because it's a legal service as well, we're not competing with most kind of frontline services, because we're going to funders that are funding legal services. But at the same time, you know, they're kind of grants from foundations. So it may well be that some of the ones that you go to, if you're not funded by any, you don't go, you know, you're not commissioned by any local services. No. Maybe that it's
basically like having a contract with them, isn't it? So you have to follow their set of rules, and like you say, those gagging orders and things like that. And that's not something that Resolute want to do. We want to make change. And again, these podcasts are trying to make that change, to get our voices out, professionals, victims and survivors, so that they can be heard without having them gagging orders in place. I mean, it's quite sad, because some women have got gagging orders in place through the family court system, so they can't speak, which is another issue. But we're very much independent in that way, which, like, it does make it harder. But we can't give up, can we? So do you want to talk about some of the campaigning that you've been doing? There's loads that I'd love to talk to you about, Nogah, but obviously I know how busy you are, and I don't want to keep you on here. I could talk to you all day.
I could talk to you all day. I think what I can do is I can talk about a few of the specific campaigns, particularly around domestic abuse. And the way that we work, particularly for me and my team, is because we're doing like high volume of inquiries, we start to see the patterns, and you start to see certain issues coming up time and time again. So as I say, in my team, you know, we deal with 300, when we were doing about 500 inquiries a year a couple of years ago. We had to cut it back a bit because we just couldn't cope. But we also do training for frontline services, both sexual violence services and domestic abuse services, all around the country. And then when you go and you sit in a room with, let's say, 15 IDVAs, you've got there the expertise of each of those people has got a big caseload, you know, they're seeing what's happening on the ground. And so when we do the training, we also hear from them how they see the different issues playing out in the cases, the survivors they support. So you start to see patterns, you start to see particular areas where the same failings are happening again and again and again. And then what we do is, like, the policy work or the campaigning work that we do, everything that we do comes out of our casework. You know, because we're seeing what's happening with the individual women, we use that as an evidence base, and then we try to campaign around those issues. So we don't just kind of think, oh, this sounds like, you know, an interesting issue, we're going to do a campaign. Everything we're doing is out of our legal work and is linked to our legal cases that we're doing.
Yeah. That's pretty much same as when I do these podcasts and campaigning. It's all based on real cases. They're all case studies, and like you say, they do follow that pattern of failings, don't they, time and time over. And when I think we're hearing we will learn from this, it ain't happening from what I'm seeing on ground.
I think you have a lot more credibility when you're talking about real cases as well, because people, you understand all the nitty-gritty. And also when you're campaigning, people always want to know case studies. They want to give examples,
Yeah.
So I've got like 3 issues that we've done some campaigning around, where there's been some change has come about, at least in 2 of them. Another one, we're kind of getting a bit of head of steam going. So I could talk a bit about those.
Yeah.
The first one is a super complaint that we put together. I wrote it and we put it in March 2019, so it's quite a long time ago now. And the super complaint, they were brand new. They only came in November 2018. And as soon as they came in, I actually started this job in November 2018. So as soon as I started, I was like, right, great, I want to do a super complaint. So a super complaint is a complaint to the police, police oversight bodies. So it's the Independent Office of Police Conduct, IOPC, the Police Inspectorate, HMIC, FRS, and the College of Policing. They do them together. And what it is it's looking at trends or patterns of policing that are affecting the public interest. So they're not looking at individual cases, they're looking at patterns. But obviously we use individual cases to illustrate those patterns. So the first we've done 2 now, but the first super complaint that I did was around failings in use of protective orders. So failings around non-mols, failings around domestic violence protection orders, failings around breaches of bail conditions and use of bail. And the last one was restraining orders. So I kept hearing again and again from frontline domestic abuse workers in the trainings. I was already doing the trainings the year before as a consultant. The year before I started working for CWJ, I was working for CWJ as a consultant, doing the trainings. And I was just hearing that time and time again, the same problems. So we did a bit of research. We got loads of, I think we kind of spoke to lots of frontline services. We had like 11 different services giving us data. And we did some research around the policies and what was being done and all the reports that had been written and the changes in the law and so on. And so the super complaint, it's on our website. If you're interested, you can just look on the resources bit. It's organised by years, so it's under 2019. And so what we did was we identified 4 different areas of failings with 4 different types of orders. The first one was bail. The second one was failing to arrest for breaches of non-mols. The third one was police failure to use domestic violence protection orders. And the fourth one was CPS failings around restraining orders and when they're asking for them or not asking for them. So I don't know if we've got time to go into all of the 4 of them, but I thought I might focus a bit on just the non-mols and the DVPOs.
Yeah, well, I actually started a petition about breaches of non-molestation orders. They're not acted upon. It's as simple as that. And I don't see implementing DVPOs either, or stalking protection orders. And from what I can see, it's not getting any better. It's getting worse. They're just not using them. They're not implementing the laws that are there.
Yeah. And the whole thing about, so DVPOs, when we looked at the stats in 2019, the latest stats were 2016, 2017. They were showing that 1% of domestic abuse crimes, that's not incidents, that's actual crimes that police have recorded, only 1% have got DVPOs. So obviously that's just a drop in the ocean, Yeah. We had, for example, there's a DV service in Leeds collected some data for us from their local MARAC, and they estimated from their caseload that they had 100 cases a month where the MARAC said there should be a DVPO. And then when their local force published their stats, they were applying for 3 a month. So that's 97 DVPOs that should have been applied for per month that were not being applied for. That's how bad it is.
Yeah.
So we put all this stats in. It took them 2.5 years to do the super complaint. At the end of the super complaint in 2021, what were the figures? Up to 2020, 1%. It was no better at all. And
No.
and they upheld our complaint on that, and they said yes, it should be higher. And they made all these recommendations to police forces. You should be, making sure the officers are properly trained about all the different protection orders. You should be making sure that you're properly funding your legal department, because a lot of the times the legal department that will do them, not it doesn't go to CPS. All of this,
Yeah.
what we got from the police as a response to that super complaint was just a load of empty waffle. There were no facts and figures, nothing concrete, just kind of general stuff about, oh yes, we think it's very important, blah, blah, blah. When you look at the figures from 2023, it's 1.3%. It hasn't shifted at all. And we said to the government, look, it's easy to just say, oh, we're going to bring in DAPOs, domestic abuse protection orders. We're going to give the police all these extra powers. There's no point in bringing all the extra powers if they're going to stay at 1%, because the vast majority of survivors will not see any difference. So now we're trying to campaign, new governments come in, they're coming to us saying, what do you want us to do, blah, blah, blah. We're saying, well, look, you've got to, it's all about implementation. There's no point in just bringing in new laws. We've got loads of powers, we've got loads of laws. They're just not being used by the police on the front line. You've got to train them, you've got to monitor them, you've got to supervise them so that if they're not doing their job, they've got to be held accountable,
Yeah.
And, otherwise it's just window dressing,
It is. It's all lip service, and I've said that before. It is all lip service. And I did an ITV news report. It were aired last week or week before, and there's been 19 women murdered due to failings of South Yorkshire and West Yorkshire police since 2019, and the police knew. They'd got the reports from these women. I think a couple of them were on bail, and they went on to be murdered. And it's just not good enough. It is not good enough, and they're not implementing these orders. I've got a case at the minute, and we're on day 18, and they've still not arrested the perpetrator, and she's down as high risk. And she's had 2 dash assessments. The first one came back, she was medium risk. I argued it, and it's come back as high risk now. But they've still not gone and arrested him, and she has been, since Friday, the last 3 weekends, she has been absolutely petrified. She's got an 8-year-old son, and they've just left her there like a sitting target. I have been on the phone to her every day to check that she's all right. And we're on day 18, and she's just said, I'm going to retract my statements. There's no point. They're absolutely useless. They're doing nothing. They went out on Saturday night to get another statement from her instead of going and arresting him. And this man has got, they've disclosed Clare's law as well to her, so she's fully aware of his previous. He's got convictions of it. Seriously dangerous man, and he's still not being arrested. And you just think, who's accountable if something happens to her?
There'll be another domestic homicide review, and they'll say there's all these failings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then all these recommendations, and then they sit there and things aren't followed up in recommendations.
Yeah.
I mean, the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, they've now got this domestic homicide oversight mechanism. So they're supposed to be looking at recommendations, following them up, and also recommendations by coroners when there's been domestic homicides. Every time it's like, these are the lessons we need to learn, and then those lessons are not implemented. So it's, this is the kind of merry-go-round.
But I think that they need to be concentrating on the prevention side of it, because those are 19 lives that could have been saved.
Yeah.
And they're still not learning from that. And bear in mind, that's only West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire police. What about around UK?
Yeah.
It's heart-wrenching.
So since the new government came in, we've started jumping up and down again and saying, look, our super complaint was finished in 2021. We still don't see the recommendations being implemented. So the Home Office, because Yvette Cooper, when she was Shadow Home Secretary, we were kind of in touch with her office quite a bit because they were kind of pushing on all the protection order stuff. So she said all that when she was shadow. So we've been kind of like, well, okay, you're in power now. What are we going to do about it? So we've been sort of jumping up and down. There's a new like MOJ and Home Office have got a new protection orders working group, like reference group with women's sector organisations. They had the first meeting in October, and there was so much on the agenda. They sort of said to me, oh yeah, we put all your issues on the agenda. There's so much on the agenda. We never got onto my things about the super complaint. So anyway, I followed up. They're like, yeah, we know this is really important. You know, we just got lots of other stuff, and then we're going to come to this, you know. So I think we just have to keep pushing. There's no other choice. The Home Office say they're really aware of it. You know, they've got to sort out the depot pilot, then they're on to next, you know. It's on their list, to-do list, blah, blah, blah. So we can't give up. We just have to keep on pushing, I think.
I said that all perpetrators should be tagged so that victims don't have to prove that they've been breached. The evidence is there. It saves resources. It would save the victim's trauma. Tag them. In this scenario now that I've got this case that I'm dealing with, they'd have gone and arrested him as soon as she'd reported. Bear in mind, she told them, she disclosed that he carries knives. And if they'd have gone and arrested him, they knew full well of his previous, and they would have tagged him. Then it's there. If he breaches it, he's arrested, lock him up. I mean, he should be locked up anyway now. Yeah. He should have been locked up day after she reported it. So, seriously dangerous man.
So the new depots, the court can order a tag. So we're going to have to see how that plays out. So I think the pilot is starting in January, I think.
I thought they would. When I wrote to Home Office, they got back to me and said that they were piloting that. Yeah. And they've still not done it.
They still haven't started. Every time they announce the pilot's going to start, I think it was going to start in 2023. Then it was going to start in January 24. Then it was going to start November 24. Now, latest I've heard is January 25. But they're only piling it into like 3 boroughs in London, a few areas around Greater Manchester, and in Wales somewhere. But anyway, it will be interesting to see how many of those tagging orders will actually be made, because the court, that's what they should be doing. They should be going out there. And in your case, they should be going out there getting a DVPO. At least they can get a DVPO at the moment. Or under the pilot, a DAPO, and apply for a tag, you know. And then, as you say, then she sort of says, oh, well, you know, he came past my house. Oh, well, it's only your word. We can't prove it. It's like, well, that's when, you know, that's what you say. The tag is going to be really good evidence. Yeah.
I was in that situation personally. So when I was living that, I could never prove that he was driving up and down my house. And I went in front of it, you know, good at police station. Well, how can you prove it? He might just be passing by. My house was not a through road. There would be absolutely no reason for him to be passing there. But they always seem to find excuses for it, don't they? Yeah. There should be no excuses.
And it's just having the will to take some action. It's like when you're looking for excuses, like you can't be bothered, and you're just finding reasons. And I think it's to do with like trivializing domestic abuse. You know, I think the sort of old school police officer thinking is, you know, I came here to catch robbers and burglars. This isn't real crime. I'm not interested in somebody sending a few tweets or, you know, text messages or driving up and down the road. They don't understand that this is real crime and it is terrorizing people's lives. And they don't think it's a priority, so they're looking for excuses to not do anything, and that's what we're up against.
Do you think they could blame the fact that they are under-resourced?
They do, and they can blame it, but at the end of the day, you know, it's a matter of what you prioritise, and you could decide, well, we're going to prioritise domestic abuse over car theft because at the end of the day, it's more important. You know, you're talking about people's lives, as you said, and if someone's driving up and down the road and you're terrified to leave the house and you talk about people being terrorised, in my book, that is more important than someone's car being nicked. So yes, they are short of money, but it's not just that. It's also where you choose to put the money.
Yeah. And I sometimes think that it's because they don't want the paperwork that comes with it. It's too complex for them. It's too complicated. They're not trained properly. You've more often than not got the just the PC going to these incidents that have no clue whatsoever how to deal with victims. They're giving them inappropriate advice. I mean, I actually attended the police station with her. I said, I'll go with you because she was that scared. And the officer said, well, we would always advise you to block him because he was continuously ringing. And I said, hold on a minute. If she blocks him, she don't know what his intentions are. As triggering as it is for him to keep contacting, she needs to know what he's intending to do. Don't she? That's my view on it. As looking at it from both sides, I can see it from when I was a victim, and I can see it from this side of the fence. And I think that it's always safer to know what their intentions are.
Also, they just go and use another number, or they use somebody else's number.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's happened.
Yeah.
It was withheld number, and then obviously you've got other organisations trying to contact her on withheld numbers. Yeah. Not leaving voicemails because it's not safe to do so.
Yeah. And it's just that to sort of putting the responsibility on her shoulders, whereas they should be taking action to protect her. I mean, I think with like social media, the police guidance specifically says don't tell people to just block from social media or to stop using social media, because she's entitled to use social media. It's him they should be taking action against, rather than telling her that it's her responsibility.
Yeah, and he's also then started, he's classic, he is an absolute classic. I can read it like a book. He started trying to add her friends, sending friend requests and things like that. He's trying to get to her that way because she's not sort of engaged with him. And I think that she's not his classic victim. She's not giving to him. Luckily, thank God, she's only had a very short relationship with him. 4 months, and she's recognised it. So thank God that she actually did reach out, because I dread to think.
I mean, if the police were doing their job properly, they would just go and get a stalking protection order. I mean, if someone's ringing constantly, but they hardly use any stalking protection orders, and the ones that they do, they take months to do it. I mean, it is the paperwork as part of the problem. I think they do need to be simplified. But the tools are there. Instead of telling her stop doing this, stop doing that, they should actually just go to court and apply for stalking protection order and stop him from doing that. They've got the legal tools, they've got the powers.
Yeah. But this is happening to thousands all the time, isn't it? And as we know, the actual complaints procedure, a lot of women aren't strong enough to deal with that, and then it goes unmissed, doesn't it? So this is why I think we need to keep raising these issues, because we can be their voices.
And we have to, it's really important to help the individual people, but the same problems are going to keep on going on and on if we don't also use those opportunities to learn from them and raise it at a bigger level, because that's how you can make bigger change. So I could talk to you about my next attempt to change things, which was a little bit more positive, just to make us feel a bit more optimistic.
Yeah.
Before we both get so depressed, we just give up and go home. I feel like we should. So one of the things that I was hearing a lot when I was doing my training, so when part of my training we go through and talk about all the different types of criminal offences that there are, and what different laws police could use, so that frontline domestic abuse workers can advocate and sort of say, but what about this and what about that? And so one of the things we're talking about is non-fatal strangulation. And a lot of the support workers were saying, it either gets ignored or it's common assault. Or they sort of say, it's too late now. It was common assault, but 6 months have gone by, and so sorry, end of story. Or it just kind of gets mentioned in passing, but it's just not actually focused on as part of assault. And actually, it's a terrifying, terrifying experience. Most women say, I actually thought I was going to die, So one of the things that I covered in my training is that the CPS guidance at that time did say that in some situations, even when the injury itself that you can visibly see is minimal, and it would normally be common assault, like it's just a red mark or maybe a little bruise or maybe nothing visible at all. Because of the level of violence used, it should be treated as ABH, actual bodily harm.
Yeah.
And obviously that's, that's that's very clear there in the guidance. So I started including this in the training. And then the domestic abuse workers would say, oh, we've raised that. None of the officers have ever heard of this. They're all like, none of them have ever seen the CPS guidance, even though it's on the website. So I started thinking, do you know what? There's just a real problem here. The CPS guidance says this. The policy says this. Literally nobody on the ground is applying it in practice.
Yeah.
And then just around the same time is when the Domestic Abuse Act was going through Parliament in 2020. And we sort of started talking to a lot of other people about different laws that could be introduced into the Act. And we sort of got together a bit of a campaign group. So we had Dr. Kath White, who's a forensic medical examiner. She was at the St Mary's Hospital in Manchester, the Sexual Assault Referral Centre. She's been doing research on non-fatal strangulation for years. I had Rachel Williams, who you might know, who set up her own charity.
Yeah.
She was a survivor of non-fatal strangulation. She had done a petition and got, I think, over, is it 10,000 or 100,000? The number that you need, for a thing in Parliament.
Yeah, it's 10,000.
Yeah, 10,000. And also Nicole Jacobs had just become the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, and Vera Baird, who we worked with closely, was the Victims Commissioner. So we all got together and sort of said, right, we need a new law in place for non-fatal strangulation, because the law that we've got just doesn't work. The law that we have for offences against the person, it's all based on what actual injury you can see afterwards. Is there a cut? Do you need stitches? It's all about the visible injuries. Think about non-fatal strangulation is 50% of women, and there's been lots of research in the US on this. 50% of cases, even fatal cases, there's nothing visible. Like there are women who've been killed, there's nothing to see on the outside, but when they dissect the body, they can see that there is internal damage.
Yeah.
So the law that we have, which is just based on visible injuries, just doesn't work for this type of assault. We need a special law that reflects just how terrifying this is and what a high volume of, violence and fear this kind of offending is. And the government said, no. And we kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And eventually we got it into the House of Lords. And Baroness Newlove, who's now the new Victims Commissioner, she was also the Victims Commissioner at that point. She wasn't Victims. Vera Baird was Victims Commissioner. She was Baroness in the Lords. She put the amendment forward in the Domestic Abuse Act for us, and the Lords voted for it. We had a big majority, and then after that, the government did a U-turn, and they said yes, and they let it in, and it became a standalone offence. And then that came into force in the Domestic Abuse Act. And now we're seeing, I haven't got all the facts and figures, but I know that there are hundreds of cases going through the courts where people are being charged with non-fatal strangulation. It's got no deadline, so it doesn't matter if it's more than 6 months. It's the same level of seriousness as ABH, 5 years maximum sentence. So much, much more serious than common assault, which is 6 months. And in fact, we've had cases that have gone to the Court of Appeal, where the Court of Appeal said, for sentencing, the starting point is immediate custody, 18 months. So it is a really serious offence. And I think the message has got through. It is getting through to police officers that this is a separate offence. We've still got a massive problem with police officers thinking, oh, well, if you can't see any red marks, if you can't see any bruising, how are you going to prove it? We've still got that problem, but at least we've got an offence.
I think that as well, some perpetrators will blame it on rough sex and things like that, don't they? And then that's another tactic that they try and use. And I think that officers aren't trained properly because they can't see through it. They can't see through Darvo, can they?
And I think it's quite different between non-fatal strangulation. Whoops, sorry, my microphone fell over. Non-fatal strangulation in domestic abuse cases and in sexual violence cases. Because I think in sexual violence cases, that's where you get the most of the, consent. She wanted to do it. She said it would, and all, we've got the horrendous cases where people die and they're like, oh, it's just rough sex gone wrong, didn't mean to kill her, and they get really, really light sentences. And then the other situations, which is in domestic abuse situations, where it's part and parcel of, 1 minute he's punching her, next minute he's dragging her down the stairs by the hair, the next minute is non-fatal strangulation. So I don't think in that situation people usually say it's consent, although unless they try to, I guess. But mostly in those kind of cases, it'll be like the police say, oh, well, how are you going to prove it? There's nothing to see. But actually, first of all, there's a lot of evidence you can look for, which the police don't know. And the training and stuff that they're getting should be, meaning they can look for it. So pinprint dots in the eyes and behind the ears, called petechiae. Right. So when you've got pinprint dots in the eyes, that's where the tiny blood vessels have burst. When someone's being strangled, tiny blood vessels burst, and you can see it behind the ears, you can see it on the scalp, but you can particularly see it in the eyes. So obviously it means it's in those cases where she's reported quickly within a few hours or whatever. But that is a typical sign of strangulation, which police can look for and they can photograph as well. You've got things like women reporting dizziness, they get tunnel vision, they get flashing lights. It's all to do with lack of oxygen to the brain. They get nausea, they get vomiting, lots of things like that, which when people describe that, if police officers knew, and actually there's quite a lot on the CPS guidance, so they've now got a whole separate page on the CPS website that is just about non-fatal strangulation. If women are describing those things, those are typical signs of, and if they describe passing out, if you've got to the point of passing out, that means there's minor brain damage, because that is your brain cells are being killed off, So it's actually quite serious. A lot of women are sort of, don't realise they have problems with like memory loss. You get like eyelid drooping, things like that. That is from lack of oxygen to the brain during strangulation, So if we can educate police officers to know these symptoms, to recognise these symptoms, first of all, they will start believing women more. And secondly, they'll realise how serious it is. It can even cause strokes, because you can get, when you block the arteries, you get little blood clots, and then they travel around the body. They can cause strokes like weeks later. So there is a lot of research out there. And the Institute for Addressing Strangulation was set up by Kath White, who was one of the campaigners. And I'm on the advisory board, and lots of people that are involved in the campaign. And Safe Lives have been doing training for police on this specific stuff. Again, it's got to be part of having specialist police officers, because not every single frontline Bobby on the beat is going to go to this training. No. You need specialist police officers that specialise in domestic abuse and know what they're doing. And
do you know what, Nogah? There's three domestic abuse officers in the DA team where we are.
It's terrible, isn't it? And it's one of the things that happened
but the thing is that it's the bobbies on the beat that's taking those first initial statements, isn't it?
It is.
Before it goes to that team. And if they're not getting it right, then what's going to happen? They should all be trained. They should all be trained in it. It should be mandatory. It's as simple as that. They're the frontline staff. They're the first point of call. They're the ones that's going into these houses or wherever an incident's happened. They should all be trained.
And the amount of training that is rolled out, it doesn't even touch the sides, in terms of the need for training. And also the need for properly resourced, decent sized domestic abuse units. In austerity in the early 2010s, so many forces disbanded their specialist units. And now all that knowledge is gone, you know, and you've got frontline officers who are really young. They don't know what they're doing.
No. It's definitely they need a lot more education on it. And considering that they're getting a phone call that is domestic abuse every 30 seconds,
Yeah.
you know, it's the highest problematic thing that they've got going on, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it should be prioritised, you would think.
Yeah, it's a really, really high volume crime. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, if you don't address it, it will just carry on, you know. We've got to prevent it.
There's no deterrent,
Yeah.
is there? There's no deterrent.
Yeah.
And I want to use what been talking about with this case. You know, this man knows exactly how the system works. He's been on the perpetrator programme. It hasn't done a thing to rehabilitate him. It has given him more knowledge on how to get away with what he's doing.
Yeah. And if they actually put in the resources to really, really deal with it properly, they might save themselves money down the line when people start to realise that I'm not going to just get away with it. You know, it's like breach of bail conditions. That's another one. They don't do anything. And so perpetrators just think, oh, well, I can do whatever I like, basically. We pushed and pushed and pushed to say, look, you've got to have guidance for the police. If he keeps breaching bail conditions, put on a DVPO, put on a, you know, and then arrest him, put on a stalking protection order, and then arrest him for that when he breaches that. Arrest him for stalking, you know, and then he's charged with stalking. If he breaches that, then he can be remanded in custody. You know, if we don't do these things, we're just making a rod for our own back. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse and keep escalating.
Yeah. I think one breach, after I'm zero tolerance, me. I have got no filters with this whatsoever. First time it's breached, put a tag on them, and that is it. That's it. And if that tag alerts the police that he's breached, if he's gone anywhere near her, he's locked up, and that's it. Their evidence is there. That would save so much money in resources.
Yeah.
The police don't have to spend hours investigating it. The victim doesn't have to go through all the trauma of, well, they're not doing anything. Am I meant to prove that he's breached it?
Yeah.
You know, and then she's waiting for next incident because they're that clever on how they do it. You know, you'd go to a supermarket and he'll turn up, but he didn't know she was there. Of course he knows she's there. You know, it's like, but how could she prove that? Because he'll get out of that by saying, well, I didn't know she was there.
Yeah. And they're very manipulative people, you know, by the nature of what they're doing. Perpetrators are manipulative people. They know how to manipulate professionals and the police. I know. Yeah. I mean, they're talking about they've got to reduce violence against women and girls by 50% in 10 years. So, you know, if they really want to do that, they've got to start prevention, you know, and protection orders. They're the most obvious thing. You've got to start cracking down to stop it further down the line. It's exactly what you said.
Yeah, but this is what I said about this. It's the violence against women and girls, right? I would say over 90% is easily domestic. So if they're talking about halving the violence against women and girls, does that mean domestic abuse cases as well?
Well, it's the biggest high volume. I mean, like you say, it is the vast majority. It's like 10 times more than sexual violence.
Yeah.
The number that are reported. Yeah.
So if they're talking about halving it, are they talking about halving the 10% that are not domestic abuse?
I don't know. They're talking about domestic abuse. They've got to be talking about domestic abuse because domestic abuse is like you say, it's the majority.
Yeah, but it's a bit like when they said they treat domestic abuse the same as terrorism. Yeah. Where did that come from? And the same with misogyny. You know,
where's the money?
Exactly. Yeah. And where's the action? Where are they implementing actions? Yeah. Because it's not happening. It just needs a complete overhaul, doesn't it?
And the problem is, I mean, it's well-meaning, but when at the same time saying we've got no money to put into the police, these things are not going to come out of thin air. You know, you need people, you know, you need police officers to do the paperwork, to apply to the courts, to go to the, you know, you can't do it on the cheap. If you want it done, you've got to pay people to do it.
But then on the flip side, they managed to get these rights under control very, very quickly. I know some that were arrested, locked up, done within a week, and that they managed to do that with that. So what I don't understand is, why do these cases take so long? Rape cases up to 6 years it could take, can't it? And then you've got 18 months for a mobile phone to be checked because it has to go through clearance and everything else. But yet, with these riots, they were caught, arrested, and sent to jail.
It's all about political priorities, isn't it? But my third topic is one where we can say to them, look, if you do this, you're going to save money. And that is where we're looking at survivors who are themselves criminalised. So it's women who are being arrested, whether it's counter allegations by the perpetrator, whether it's forced offending, like she's being forced by him to sell drugs or to, involved in fraud, or even a few cases, tends to be more sexual violence cases where women are being arrested for making supposedly false allegations. And so we actually had a meeting with the MOJ Minister, Alex Davies-Jones, last week with myself and Harriet. So we've got a big campaign at CWJ, we're going for several years now, to bring in new laws to protect domestic abuse survivors who are being criminalised. And that would actually save them a hell of a lot of money. There's a lot of women in prison. I mean, something like the majority of women in prison have suffered domestic abuse. They're there for all sorts of reasons, but there's a lot of women in prison who should not be there. And so one of the things that we're trying to push for is to introduce a new defence of women who are being coerced into offending by a perpetrator. So at the moment, you can't really use the offence of duress, because to use duress, you have to literally show that somebody's like holding a gun to your head. Like, if you didn't do this, you'd be dead, that kind of thing. So what we want them to do is to introduce a new offence, a little bit like they have an offence for modern slavery, where if you can show that you're a victim of trafficking, then you won't be prosecuted for, for offending that you did because you were forced to do it, because you're a victim of trafficking. So something similar to that, specifically for domestic abuse survivors. So we were campaigning for that in the domestic abuse bill when that went through in 2020, 2021, and it actually got passed in the Lords. But then when it went back, the bill went back from the Lords to the Commons and the government threw it out. But at that time, the Labour Party was supporting it. So Jess Phillips was supporting it, So now we're going back to them saying, look, you supported this when you were in opposition. So how about putting it through now? Also wanting to change the law on self-defence. So at the moment, we've got a special threshold for what they call the householder defence. So if somebody burgles you and you assault that burglar and you use disproportionate force, you're allowed, you won't be guilty. Whereas if somebody attacks you in the pub and you respond with self-defence, but you use disproportionate force, you will be guilty of assault, even if it was in self-defence. But it's accepted that if you've got a burglar breaking into your house and you hit them over the head with a baseball bat, that's kind of like you're allowed to defend yourself in that situation. So we're saying, well, why?
Because they're on your property.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically.
So we're saying, well, why should you be entitled to that when someone's breaking into your house, but you're not entitled to that when you're defending yourself in your own house from somebody who lives in your house? When you're a victim of domestic abuse, you should have the same protections when you're defending yourself. And actually, a lot of women who kill their abusive partners, a higher percentage of them use knives. Yeah. Because it's all you've got in the house to defend yourself with. And, so we're saying, well, when women do assault somebody who is trying to assault, in self-defense, and they use a lot of force to defend themselves, the law should recognise that it's not just like any old situation in the pub, that you are basically under attack in your own home. So that's a change in the law. We're saying the householder defence, that should apply to domestic abuse survivors. So that, again, we got that through in the Lords as well, back when it was the Tory government, but they threw it out when it went back to the Commons. So, I mean,
are you finding that the new government that's in now, are they sort of backpedaling?
at the moment, it's difficult to say because they're being very, what they're saying is very positive. So they're wanting to meet with us. They're saying, oh yeah, this is very interesting. We're reading all the stuff. We're reading the briefings. We're thinking about it. So in a way, it's early days. I think the jury's still out in terms of whether they're going to follow through. I think that they do want to do a lot of things, but they're not prepared to spend any money. So if it's something that's not going to cost anything, so something like this criminalization of survivors, we're really saying to them, look, this is not going to cost you. It's going to save you money. We've got the same where we had a victory. Actually, this victory was under the last government, but just in the very, very end, just before the general election, in rape cases where the police are collecting huge amounts of counselling records of survivors. And we managed to get a law through to say that there should be more privacy protections for counselling records. That's more of a problem in rape cases than in domestic abuse cases. And one of the things we said is, it's actually going to save you time, instead of police officers and prosecutors trawling through, they take forever to get all these records, third-party materials, spending ages and ages trawling through, looking for any tiny inconsistency. Oh, there she said this and here she said that, and trying to pick apart her account. We're saying, actually, this is a change. It's the right thing to do because of right to privacy, but also it's actually going to save you time and save you money. So I think in those things, I think the will is there, and where it's going to save them money, we may see those changes. Where it's going to cost them money, I think the jury's out about whether they're going to do anything because they haven't got the money, and I don't know. I don't know whether it will make any change. I really, really don't.
But you'd think that when it's costing the Nicole Jacobs says that it's costing this country on estimates £78 billion per year. Billion. And I think to myself, there are so many common sense procedures that could be put in place that would save a hell of a lot of that. So I don't know why they don't put them in place.
It's short-term thinking, isn't it? Money. It's like not thinking, what's the long-term benefit? It's short-term thinking, well, how much is this extra police officer going to be to go out? They're not thinking, how much are we losing to the economy of that person not going to work because she's got post-traumatic stress disorder? You've got to think big. There was a piece of research about this issue about victims of trafficking who are made to commit offences. We've got people who have brought into the UK to work in cannabis farms, and then when they get raided by the police, they're actually trafficking. They're not allowed to leave the building. They're getting no wages. They're getting beaten up if they're doing. They are proper modern slavery victims. Why are they still being sent to prison even though the police are? There's been a law to stop that going back now for 10 years. It's costing a huge amount of money to put somebody in prison. It's because the prison budget and the police budget are separate. So it's going to cost the police X amount of money to train all their officers. So they don't want to spend the money. But if that money was spent, you'd be saving 10 times more money on all those prison places. But the police budget is with the Home Office and the prison budget is with the MOJ. Nobody's joining up the dots,
But not there's nothing joined up anyway, is there, in this entire system? Nothing is joined up, and that's another massive problem with it all. They don't communicate amongst each other at all, do they? And again, it seems to be that they're not interested unless things hit crisis point.
Yeah. And I think our strongest argument is what you just said. Not only you're going to make a lot of women's lives a lot better, but in the long run, all of society is going to be better off if you just spend the money to address this problem at its source, just actually get to the heart of the problem rather than just putting on a Band-Aid, a sticking plaster when things get to a crisis, like you said. Yeah.
I mean, I'd just done the 8 stages to homicide with Professor J. Monckton Smith. And, it is clear-cut. It is a clear-cut pattern, the lead up to everything. But they don't take things seriously before it gets physical. That's what I see. Unless it's a physical assault, they're not interested. They can't be bothered with text messages. They just will not do anything about it. Now, if things were put in place earlier on to prevent that, then that would save all that money, wouldn't it?
And all the research shows that actually coercive controlling behaviour is the biggest predictor of homicide and stalking.
Yeah.
It's the same mindset. It's like that obsessive mindset. That person is obsessive, they're fixated, they're the most dangerous people. And again, you need to train police officers to know what is actually really dangerous. Yeah. And it's not necessarily the bruises, it's that obsessiveness that is that dangerous
Out
individual.
of all the women that we've supported, every single one would say that they would rather take a physical beating than any form of coercive control and emotional abuse, because the psychological impact that has is it destroys the rest of their lives. It destroys the rest of their lives. Yeah. You know, it never leaves them. A bruise can heal, but that scar mentally stays with them. Yeah.
Well, I think if we don't get too depressed, if we've got to think about like the bigger picture, like if you think about in the 1980s, we didn't have IDVAs and ISVAs, and we didn't have coercive controlling behaviour as an offence. And sometimes it feels like we are hitting our heads against a brick wall. But if you look at the longer term, slowly, chipping away, we are getting better understanding in society about domestic abuse, and we are getting more laws, and we are slowly trying to get them better implemented. So I think sometimes you kind of lose that bigger picture because we're all so frustrated by
I know
but we've got to hold on to that. We've got to hold on to that hope that slowly over the next 10 years, it will slowly start to get better. And I think it is better. It is better than it used to be 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And we've got to...
I just wish they'd start taking it a bit more seriously.
Yeah. But it's thanks to people like you who were doing this 20, 30 years ago that we have made improvements. None of the things that we've got now, whether it's new laws, new funding or whatever, none of it came out of the blue. It came out of people demanding it, and people shouting about it, and people jumping up and down and supporting the women. And slowly, a bit more funding started to come through, whatever. So, it only change is really, really slow, but it only comes through people doing that, making those demands and speaking up about it, and having the podcast and having the press and seeing, getting it out there. That's the only way that change has ever happened.
It is. I'm gonna love you and leave you now.
I thought I'd just end on a good note.
I know, bless you. I don't want to take too much. I know how busy you are, so I'll let you go and get back to work.
Well, it's amazing work that you're doing, Debbie, and good luck to you.
Same, straight back at you. You do absolutely amazing, and I've got so much respect for Centre of Women's Justice and you as well, Nogah. It's just thank you, and we've just got to keep going, haven't we?
Yeah, same to you, and we'll onwards and upwards.
Yeah, speak soon.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.